Rachel, it's been over 10 years since Naomi Klein released her book, quote, "This Changes Everything," end quote, which framed the climate crisis as a fundamental conflict between capitalism and the environment. For a time after its publication, it really seemed like significant progress was on the horizon, with growing calls for a Green New Deal and major companies announcing ambitious net zero targets. What happened to that momentum?
You're right, Jake. There was a period of genuine hope, with militant mobilizations pushing for keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and even some of the world's biggest companies and nations committing to long-term emission cuts. However, that was followed by a multifaceted backlash, largely funded by corporations. We saw this most clearly with the Trump administration, which within its first 100 days implemented over 140 measures designed to weaken environmental regulations and aggressively promote fossil fuel use.
Over 140 measures? That sounds like a systematic dismantling of environmental protections. What were some of the key actions taken, and how did that impact the broader climate effort?
It was indeed systematic. Trump's administration filled his cabinet with proponents from the oil industry, deliberately weakened federal agencies that were at the forefront of addressing the climate crisis, and canceled crucial environmental justice initiatives that had the potential to save lives. He also signed executive orders that eased restrictions on fossil fuel extraction and export. This created an environment where the very banks and companies that contribute to our climate catastrophe felt emboldened to revert to old ways.
So it sounds like this political shift provided cover, almost an excuse for these financial institutions and corporations to abandon their earlier climate pledges. But why pivot back so quickly? Was it simply about opportunism or something deeper? Specifically, we are seeing banks and other large companies retracting their renewable ambitions and going back to funding fossil fuels, right?
It was a combination of factors, but two primary drivers stand out, which is what the source points to: an apocalyptic fear of regulation and the pursuit of what the source calls super profits. These powerful entities, once they saw the political landscape shift and the world's most powerful man actively assaulting the planet's environmental protections, let their, quote, masks slip, end quote. They dropped their stated renewable ambitions because the threat of regulation diminishing their profits was lessened, and the immediate financial gains from fossil fuels became too tempting to resist.
That's a powerful way to put it. It suggests that many of those initial commitments were perhaps conditional or strategic rather than deeply ingrained values. And this fear of regulation driving the pursuit of super profits seems particularly problematic given the urgency of the climate crisis.
Exactly. And this corporate and political reversal is also amplified by another serious problem: climate misinformation. According to a thorough study, this misinformation, often spread by far-right and right-wing populist politicians, has become so pervasive online that it risks turning a crisis into an absolute disaster. It erodes public will and creates political space for these companies to backtrack without significant public or regulatory pressure.
So we're not just seeing a withdrawal of pledges, but an active effort to undo progress driven by financial incentives and enabled by a deliberate campaign of misinformation. It brings us back to Naomi Klein's original thesis that the climate crisis is inextricably linked to the workings of our economic and political systems. It seems the fight she outlined in This Changes Everything is far from over.
That's certainly the clear takeaway. The initial optimism that followed calls for a Green New Deal and corporate net zero targets proved fragile against the combined forces of corporate backlash, political deregulation, and the allure of massive profits in the fossil fuel industry, all while climate misinformation spreads unchecked. If you found this conversation insightful, consider sharing the episode with someone who would appreciate it.